to side quests, and we have back with us Mr. Wes Schantz and Mr. Vincent Reese this week, we hope.
Yeah, I'm here.
All right, good to hear from you, Wes. Hopefully Vince gets on with this technology pretty soon. I know that we were having some technical difficulties early. Perhaps that's him, like the pots and the pans in the background.
Yeah, sorry.
That's that NPR level stuff we have. Is that you there, Vince?
Ooh,
Sound quality
wowzers.
is good. All right.
Okay. Yeah, you sound pretty good there, Vince, until that magical disappear plus like auto-tune sound that Anchor sometimes when people talk over each other by accident.
There we go.
Okay, so we got this time through the wall market, the fall of we ended last time with Don Cornelius, and we were talking about that. And Wes, you were going to maybe tell us something about what you saw in those sorted places, because I've been playing the game so poorly that I missed that. And for this time, we got through the plate falling. We found out about the name Sephiroth, about the name Shinra, about the place Wutai. We saw some big musical scenes with the Aeris theme going off, while Elmira told us about her tragic past, and we learned about the tragic present of Barrett, and just how war seems to create poverty and sadness and rip at the fabric of the family of a place, and that it creates slums like the ones that exist there. And we also saw sort of a Shinra measure and meet the force of Avalanche in a way very similar to at the end of Batman Begins, when Detective Gordon, then I think Captain Gordon, or soon to be Captain Gordon, says, "Have you ever heard of escalation?" And he shows the Joker card to Batman. So we have a lot to talk about today and not a ton of time to do it. So what has been on your guys' mind? Vince, you finally got a copy of the game. That was good to hear.
Oh, hell yeah. I don't actually want to be talking with you guys. I just want to keep playing this game. But, I made a commitment, honor, all that bullshit, whatever.
Good man.
So...
Noble sacrifice.
How far did you get, Vince? Are you like way ahead of us now? Did you just keep playing way beyond Shinra HQ?
Well, I know you losers aren't even to level 13 yet, right?
I think I'm around 12, at least with Cloud, but I think that's sort of a limited perspective on your part to just think about the level of the highest character. Clearly, you're looking at Cloud pixel privilege there, and
it's typical little dude perspective where I just compensate by attaching to the highest ranking dude around me.
That's good. Well, okay, so I wanted to dive into sort of a question here.
Hold on, I do have a real question though.
Okay.
So the one thing I noticed is that battle mechanics and sort of where each of us chooses. I was curious to see how you attack, if you guys defend, how you equip your people, characters, and what do you think that means about the interaction with it? But this is more like a minutia, not with the storyline, I guess.
That's a great question, I think. Wes, do you want to go first? I have an answer pretty quick.
I was interested. Vince, you said something about you used some grenades fighting Reno. I
totally didn't do that.
That's not in my repertoire at all.
Me either.
That's cool.
Very smart.
That's a way to do it. I always just I put cover materia on Cloud, so he gets the most breaks, and I leave him in the front row. I put other people in the back row generally, except Tifa. Sometimes I leave her in the front row too. I give whoever has, sometimes Cloud or someone else. I'll give fire and all materia, so they can just end battles quickly.
Hell yeah!
That way, get through the battle. But I mean, it's such an early stage of the game. There isn't really a lot of strategy even necessary at this point. Just attack, basically.
Yeah.
Just kill the enemy quickly and go on. Yeah.
Yeah, I have possibly an even less sophisticated version of that. Just to mention sort of my strategy towards even purchasing there, to show my sort of libertarianness, I try and get as balanced amount of each of the items that I need. And I think this isn't one of the places that Final Fantasy shows its fantasy element. You buy potions and ethers and phoenix downs, which resurrect you, which I did not understand at all as a very foolish and poorly educated 14-year-old. I was like, Phoenix down. Okay, I just accept that. And that's another interesting thing about the game, right? How much you just accept. But I try and get a balanced amount of that. And I remember that you can actually get depressed in this game and you can get hyper and you need to take essentially pills for that, which is an interesting foreshadowing to, the epidemic going through us, our opioid epidemic in America right now. If video games as stories are agglomerations of that, of embodied experiences over, like, say, a civilization level of body of people, then it would make sense that video games as a representation of what is happening in the world at that time would prefigure what would continue to happen or get bigger. And so that, it makes sense that what happens in the video game might happen in the world a little bit later, because it is already happening when the video game is produced. We just have failed to recognize it by that point. Sort of like cancer at middle stage. You just don't catch it soon enough. And perhaps video games help us to catch these things so that futures that are terrible and full of Shinra and Mako never come to be. My battle strategy, I also do the fire and all. I think that's epic. Wes, I really like that you put everybody in the back except for Tifa. I think that's smart. I didn't even think that probably doesn't even hurt Barrett's attack power because of his because he's a remote shooter. He's he can shoot, so I suppose the bullet loses a little bit of speed, but whatever. I thought that was smart. But yeah, just like you, I'm mostly just going fast. And something I would add that I think is a good strategy, especially since we're playing through like this. Have you guys affected the battle and speech text speed yet?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Oh, really? I didn't do that yet. No.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I forgot that you could do that. Yeah, I had for sure done that as a 7th grader. It's funny to what extent I would actually explore things more at that point rather than trying to stick to the traditional narrative. And actually, I did want to bring that up. So yeah, you can do that, Wes, and that's really nice. So then the battles speed up a little bit. Nice. But I was talking to Wes in the pre-show about how I'm sort of speeding through this game because I'm trying to get to these next points. It's a very different experience from when I was playing as like a way to form my personality and character as a 14-year-old. I played with love then. Now I sort of play with less love and with some nostalgia, but I realized that I wasn't getting the full experience out of the game by digging into the nooks and crannies that I used to when I was younger. I wasn't exploring to the same extent as I had, and because of that, I was missing things in the game. And then I had, boom, a big realization. I was like, when do you get to the good point of the game? And the answer is never, because the whole game is good. There's not like one part that really stands out above others. I mean, there's some epic CGI animations that we'll see that I think do stand out, but it's like these times in this game are the best times in the game in a way. You're with Tifa and with Aeris. Most people are still alive except for Biggs, Wedge, and Jesse now. We can have a libation for them. But I'm like rushing through this in the same way that I find perhaps a modern adult rushes through life.
So are you rushing through because of just outside time commitments or another reason?
That's a big one. But I think it's not only outside time commitments, but also just a turn of consciousness that's occurred. That in becoming more goal-directed, I'm forgetting the sort of superordinate goal of exploring that which you think you know as a person. And, that's sort of the point of relationships with people like you and Wes too, right? Like whenever we have a conversation, we realize there are depths to our personalities that we hadn't accessed before, that perhaps weren't even manifest in the world. And so in this game, it's like I can claim to know it in that I'm moving from one point to the other, but I miss layers of meaning. Like I started talking to characters in the wall market, the NPCs, partly because of your discussion about NPCs and what we turned that into last week. And they were all traumatized. Every single one of them was bringing up the fact that what happened in Sector 7 was deeply troubling. I mean, their emotions were destabilized to the max. And it was just interesting seeing that that's how you can tell that a community has been shocked by an action, by the fact that each and every one of them is expressing themselves in the same way. They're now talking about the same subject. That there does seem to be a very deep unity that you can't argue away between people. And when it comes to emotional stability or events like 9/11, Tower of Babel level events, where things collapse that you never expected ever to, whether they be physical ceilings or intangible fallings of, like, say, laws or customs. It puts you in a position that you don't know how to act in. You're stunned, dumb, shocked.
Can I speak to that really quickly?
Yeah.
So one thing I noticed, and this happened back when we were in Don Corneo's bedroom. So
good memories.
The character on How Could I Forget That Moment? It was beautiful. Me and Don Corneo. So on his bed, you have a Chinese character. I brought up Yu and Nan last time, man and woman for the gym and the brothel. But this character is Tian, sky, heaven.
I know that from the I Ching.
So already we have this image of heaven that is attached to Don Corneo's bed. This is the heaven for him. And I'm not really, we can explore that if we want, but what I'm interested is later when people are speaking of heaven or the sky, they're speaking in terms of the sky falling. Not the plate crashing down, not the city falling, but the actual sky, this sort of firmament, this everlasting thing above them.
And meteor will come as well from above, and Genova came from above.
Yeah. So that's actually good. We already have this descent from the sky downwards, even in dropping cloud from this Tien bedroom into the sewer. But I guess what I was curious is about this change in the natural world, where the natural sky is replaced by an artificial sky that takes on some new. This is sort of hazy to me right now. I wanted to throw it out to you guys and sort of get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, Wes, I want you to hit that, and I want to throw out a couple things I want you to hit with it. What about Harry Potter and that top? Yeah.
I'm very averse to hitting things in general, but I'll speak to Vince's point. So the couple of scenes that you get downstairs, or not downstairs, sorry, I always confuse them, but it's in the Honeybee Lounge area, down at the bottom, of the wall market. So if you do go in there with the membership card before you go to the Don's mansion and do the whole stuff with him in his torture chamber and in his heaven bedroom, then you get to see a couple of very, like, disturbing and, like, quasi messianic scenes going on in the Honeybee Lounge, right? If you look through the keyhole in one of the rooms, I think to the right of this kind of circular antechamber, there's some kind of crazy fantasy being played out there, which seems to involve Shinra, like President Shinra or someone very high up in Shinra, having this fantasy of being the, like, savior figure for their society. And there's, like, lightning flashes going on and this sort of mythological religious language that's being, like, chanted by the people in there with him. And probably you're grateful that you can't see anything very distinctly at that point. But you sort of, like, are freaked out by that. And so to your point about the heaven thing, it's like there is some pretty overt language about the promised land and that sort of typology of heaven that is invoked in that very bizarre way early on there, but then more and more distinctly as you get more pieces of the story falling into place as you go along.
Yeah, that's right. And we got in this this playthrough Sing mentioning the promised land, which the ancients would take us to, a place of supreme happiness. And we will, and as we go, we will get this character Sephiroth talking about that concept as well. And so what I'm sort of finding interesting about the idea of Shinra as sort of a prophet and speaking this prophetic language and sort of being sort of a pseudo political / super corporate, like new sort of God entity. And I think Shinra does actually mean God in Japanese. Is that what we seem to have in this episode is sort of an Old Testament fairness-based God, a God of justice, in that Shinra strikes back precisely in the way that they were struck by Avalanche. That they indiscriminately will strike in the same way, and the same way that, like, say, humans imitate and iterate each other's behavior, so do terrorist / corporate governments. It's almost like they're like what it was also on Don Corneo's rug, the twin dragons that were intertwining with each other, like a DNA symbol or symbol of infinity. And that's a mirror symbol, and that the person in front of you is embodied in the same way that you are and feels the same pain that you are and can understand the same truth that you do, as opposed to what the postmodernists say. And so I feel like part of the idea there,
say?
Well, it doesn't matter, because what they say has little worth. And so it'll pass away in the way that the wind does. And that can be justified by the fact that none of their papers get cited anymore, even by their friends. And so, they can make fun of our numbers, but their numbers are pretty small too. That said, if Avalanche uses violence to try and deracinate Shinra, well, the natural response of Shinra is to use violence back. So it reminds, go on.
So I have a question with that, because I'm going to rephrase this. Are we presupposing that Shinra has not committed violence in the past that is being responded to by Avalanche?
I think the scale of the violence is shown to be different from what it has ever been. Like, people say, I never thought they would let the plate fall, and they're shocked and traumatized. I'm not blaming Avalanche for this so much as trying to illustrate potentially a universal human principle that when you enact violence against somebody, it is almost impossible for them to turn the other cheek.
Oh, okay, I understand. Thank you.
And to pursue, I mean, it's precisely because that's almost impossible that's a Christian maxim, right? That if you enact violence on somebody, most likely what is going to happen is things are going to devolve into conflict. But if you are really smart, like Jordan Peterson says, and like Zeus and Athena show at the end of book 24 of the Odyssey, when they stop the battle between the suitors' families and Odysseus, because Odysseus justly killed the suitors, but their families want revenge, which is also justice, and they both have just and fair claims, and so they can get violent, which means that you can always find a just claim for war, but it's never good for you, because again, it destroys your families and makes you poor. Then what you really should be aiming for is peace, not justice in the fairest possible sense, not I'm going to hit you, you're going to hit me back.
Well, that's the way that it seems like Barrett's whole ideology is basically right. Like Shinra has attacked the planet itself and the source of life, right? And it doesn't know how bad that's going to be in the long run. And so he's like, by any means necessary, going to stop that from happening. But like you point out, his way of going about that being flashy and explosive and destructive is a way which has to be superseded by the rest of the game, right? The way that this plays out is through like the development of character. And that becomes the great weapon against Shinra and like the real enemies which emerge in the course of the adventure.
I think there's great evidence for that in how Elmira reacts when she hears that Barrett left Marlene alone. She says, "How could you do that?" And he says, "Well, I'm trying to save the planet, no matter what." And that seems to be like sort of like the traditional father sort of position, right? He has to stay away from the family for 12 hours a day, working hard, in order to save the planet, which is whatever his company does. But in doing that, he sacrifices the most precious thing in the world, which is time with his family.
We're also going to find out later, though, that this isn't the only reason why he's fighting, though. There's a deeper... I don't know. This is a cover-up. This is a psychological cover-up, I think, of Barrett. Idealized justification as opposed to the more earthly justification that we'll get later.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
The whole revenge thing.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that, but I think that's also an interesting thought to keep in mind when you think about the seemingly noble intentions of people who justify terrorism by a concern for justice. Because what is lurking at the bottom of Barrett's mind, revenge, might well be what is lurking in the mind of, say, someone who claims to be an environmentalist but is really an anti-humanist, who says something like, well, because humans pollute the planet, humans are a pollution on the planet, and thus humans should be, or the planet would be better off without us. And I feel like there's a place for that argument within this game, because there is an actual reaction by the planet against the humans at one point. So we're pretty far away from that. That said, I want to ask y'all a question. It's sort of funny. I remember when I first got this game, right before I got this game, and I know I was getting it for Christmas because I'd asked for it, and we were clear on that in my household at that time. And I played a Game Boy version of like Final Fantasy Legend 3. I'd beaten that game fairly quickly. I think it only took something like 10, 12, 14 hours.
Is that the one with Death X?
It might have been. I think it might have been. There was only one tough boss, and he was on a bridge, of course, in front of a fortress, and it took me a while to beat him because I wasn't very conscientious. But when Final Fantasy VII came, and I played that alongside Tony Hawk, which is what I did to chill out my mind after Final Fantasy VII messed me up too much. And I would, when I got to the end of the Midgar section, it took me probably 7 to 10 hours. Yeah. I thought I had dang near beaten the game. I thought, because it had been my entire world, my entire known territory. And just to find out that, yeah, right, man, you're way back in the beginning. It was shocking, almost, to me. How was that for you? I mean, and it's going so fast for me this time. Now it doesn't seem... Mm-hmm. It's almost like the difference between going through anything as an adult versus as a kid. It's like it's not imprinting now, so the experience isn't as naturally meaningful. I don't know. What did you guys think about that? Or have you experienced something like that?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, the scale of the game is on a totally different level, right? It's got 3 separate CDs worth of data that you know. But so with the whole like within a world thing too, you kind of get the first glimpse of that. At this point in the game, you can go out past the church where you met Aeris, and you can see the outside for the first time. In like this big, you get to this big field, and the view of the camera is from so far away you can't even see yourself when you emerge. All you see is like the blight of the city, and then a little bit of like green and blue sky out at the very edge of the screen, like the panoramic view. And so you kind of like get this like little bit of the overworld theme there too. Like for the first time you can hear that kind of motif, but it's muted and you're still within the fence around the city. And I found that, very like evocative of this idea that you're sort of stuck in this kind of prison of the industrial thing, which is very far from what you might expect going into a Final Fantasy game. And then only once you complete this area, which takes a pretty long time, do you get like the actual Final Fantasy-like experience that you might have been expecting, right? Like the overall.
Yeah, and the first thing you see is a chocobo. A chocobo farm. So you get some fun immediately, like a great reward.
Yeah.
That's totally. It does unlock it unlocks several new experiences for you. And I know that's something you wanted to talk about too. Vince, sort of the Midgard theme and we will run into the Midgard serpent soon, our first chocobo farm, and we'll go on a little vacation to the beach, if I recall correctly. And I think we meet the infernal Hojo there, who yeah. And I like that perspective that you had there, Wes, because I remember coming out there and seeing that sort of desert on the outside and hearing the sort of semi-gloomy, like so many of the leitmotifs in this game, world theme, and recognizing that that's sort of like what childhood is when you're in the zone of proximal development. You can see the future and what you're growing out to, but you're not yet capable of attaining to it. Or perhaps even you can see where someday you will be, but for the moment you're still kept within sort of an estuary. You're kept within the boundaries of perhaps your own perspective. And I was wondering whether that's sort of a comment that the game is making, and that is a way in which Final Fantasy VII shares in the typical motif of there being a hometown which you need to leave in order to become the hero you're going to be. That what you have to do is grow out sort of your individualistic, haughty, childish perspective and see yourself as a speck on the map, and see just how big the world is and just how weak you are in it. And then you're ready to operate within the real space, which is the world, and you can leave the estuary. You can be flushed down out of your bath in the Matrix. It's like now you're ready for the real world, and now and the first big enemy you run into, or actually try and avoid, which I think is even more significant, is a big ass snake, called the Midgard Serpent of all things. Yeah, Vince, what do you think of all that? You've been oddly silent.
I think we lost Vince.
Oh, we might have lost Vince. That would explain why he was so quiet for this amount of time.
I know. You tried to throw out to him the Midgard Serpent a couple times there. He didn't bite. I hope he comes back. I did want to go back to something.
Oh, Vince, are you back? Well, go on, Wes.
Something about the point he made about like purity of intentions or motivations. That struck me with the image of Aeris being kidnapped and taken in the helicopter, where you see that she's been captured by the Turks after all those years, right? And so for Cloud and Barrett and Tifa, the motivation for going up against Shinra has shifted at that point from destroying them because they are sucking the lifeblood of the planet to we have to rescue Aeris, right? Because she has proven to be such a trustworthy, good friend to everybody in different ways, right? So it like makes it also like line up a lot more with the kind of rescue the princess archetype rather than a weird like mixed up kind of terrorist organization thing going on.
Right. They said the moral high ground starts to shift back towards them, and they develop a connection to a person rather than just a disembodied idea of freedom. And it also makes me wonder, and again, just a hypothesis here, whether Aeris or the princess as archetypal goal that you strive towards is Mario, or as Zelda, or Link in Pursuit of Zelda, who is of course wisdom, like Beatrice, or Athena. It makes me wonder whether what the princess archetype is the anima as Eros, or as the principle of connection. The goal itself is what brings the people together in connection so that they can trust each other and pursue the most exciting thing in their life together, that which releases dopamine into their system, incentive reward, because all of you are grouped together in pursuit of the same goal, so you share in all the same good things together. Although, just like at the end of a battle, right? You all have your specific dance that comes out. And Vince, did you make it back?
Hey, am I here?
You are here, Vince.
So good to be back.
What was lost is now found. You're like the Philosopher's Stone. That's great. That's excellent. All right, so Vince, I'm just gonna finish this point really quickly, and then we want to ask you about the Midgard serpents.
Please.
But I was suggesting that the princess as archetype, and Wes brought up that Aeris is now sort of like a princess who has been kidnapped, who is now sort of legitimized the goodness of the Avalanche members, or rather, they now have a new purpose towards which they are unifying their efforts, and that purpose is a far more archetypally RPG/video game.
Yeah, it's more in line with like Mario.
Right. And I mentioned that.
Oh,
and so I was suggesting that the prince itself, or the princess, is the goal, which is the anima or eros, the principle of connection between the team members, that which binds them together in pursuit of the same thing. And so the captured princess is basically the incentive that draws you into life with others and creates a powerful bond between you. So I was interpreting Aeris as sort of the spiritual bond that will develop between the party members, and I would add emphasis for that as what happens at the end of disc 1, though I won't talk about that yet.
Can I do a talk now?
Go, please.
Oh, okay. So one thing, where are we all right now in the game? I'm just curious to where I can go. Are we stopping right after the fall of plate 7 or whatever?
We're up to the entering into Shinra HQ.
Okay. Have either of you guys gone into Shinra yet?
Not yet.
I'm not anywhere beyond the gate.
Okay, so just maybe next time I want to put a bookmark in this question, because if you take the stairs, you see exactly what Alex is talking about become manifest in their speech interactions, and it's a very interesting time.
I was about to make another mistake and just run right in there, by the way. So add that to the list of misbehaviors on my part.
You're welcome, dude.
Thank you.
So one thing too with this new bonding that's coming out, I thought it was very interesting when we're on the support column, when we're climbing up, even with Wedge as he falls. This is when Cloud really begins to associate even more with those around him. He became I don't know, I guess connected with Aeris after he was her bodyguard. Then we see his surprise at Tifa when she's behind the chocobo cart wagon. And increasingly we have these greater levels of connection that are forming. And now it seems there's this huge connection created through the deaths of this old Avalanche team. And have you guys already spoken on this? I don't want to take up airtime if you have.
No, this is good.
So what I was curious about, and I was talking to my roommate about this just a week ago or so, was the scene preceding the Iliad with Iphigenia and Agamemnon, where you have this great sacrifice, this great death that that is voluntarily taken, but nonetheless ruins Agamemnon, and also means that he can't leave Troy without winning or being absolutely defeated. This seems not exactly like that, but there is this great sacrifice that now makes these surviving members of Avalanche have to rededicate themselves to a task that is no longer just the world, but is their friends, and they cannot step back now. This is sort of a threshold moment for Cloud, Barrett, Tifa, Aeris, in a way that really wasn't present before. They cannot stop now.
I like what you say about threshold moment. When you say threshold moment, are you speaking like of the Roman Janus, the god of doorways and gates, that it's a moment after which things can't go back to the way they once were?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I think that's fascinating because I think this game is full of those sorts of moments, and that our lives themselves are full of such moments that after something has happened, things are not the way they once were. Like, say, after a breakup, you're treated completely differently by the person from how you were when you were together and you were a promising potential husband. Now you're just a, soon to be discarded, soon to be NPC sort of character. And maybe that's even the best outcome. And so that makes me wonder just about, there was a question I was asking beforehand, and it was about the NPCs. And I guess I started at the beginning. And so in our Montaigne sort of way, we're finally getting there.
Fuck yeah.
As we roll
Montaigne.
along.
Fucking big dick energy.
And so Biggs, Wedge, and Jesse always seem to me rather vague characters. Like, you never get a character art stencil of them. You never see them portrayed in CGI in a detailed way. And so a question I was asking that I was interested in both of your answers on was, do you think that what makes them so indistinct as characters is that they are indistinct and undeveloped as characters and people, or that is Cloud's perception of them because they are not as close to him or as useful to his goals in the same way as Tifa and Barrett are? So are they indistinct because of his sort of subjective perception of them, or are they just sort of objectively indistinct?
Well, I have a quick question about how we've been interacting with Biggs, Jesse, and Wedge before this moment, before they are irretrievably taken from us. How have you guys just tried to interact with them in some of the scenes where you're among them and choose? Okay. So what are the things that you've noticed when you've spoken to them?
Well, Jesse seems to be working on me a little bit, and she seems to not buy the whole tough guy act, and she's very kind. And it seems to be what I'm getting from her. I guess I focus less on Biggs and Wedge, romantic at heart.
I mean,
what have you seen, Wes?
Wedge is thick, though. You want that.
One of them, I forget which, mentions about how many of their agents must have died to get the codes that they use to get into the reactor. I forget who says it. It might be Jesse, but it could be one of the other two. The others are, I think, less developed, even more sketchy, and pretty much just what you said, like they're distinguishable only in terms of how they look. I do get the sense, though, that Biggs, the skinny one, is kind of like
twink.
He's like a proto. He's just a proto Cloud, basically, right? Like he's trying to be tough and trying to do stuff, but really has very little ability or idea what's going on.
Okay, so then I would like to contrast that with that is a proto Cloud, illusion Cloud. And Wedge is actually the real Cloud, say the pre PTSD Vietnam Cloud. Because Wedge, if you talk to him right when you get back to Seventh Heaven, he talks about how he's someday going to be something. He's going to be famous one day, and that's exactly what we see young Cloud talking to Tifa at the well at. So maybe I think they definitely, like, there's not a lot of character, but we can also infer a whole world or part of a world from these small interactions. One thing that I noticed with Jessie is she does seem to be putting the moves on Cloud, but she also seems to be really stressed out about something. Whenever Cloud, when you go to speak to Jessie, she's always talking to herself. It sounds like she's calculating something or trying to figure out moves to predict what someone else is doing. And it's very vague, but when she notices you there, she sort of freaks out and tells you to stop listening. And I didn't get a romantic sense from those voyeuristic interactions.
Huh. I'm not exactly sure what to say about that. It's very interesting. I've never thought so deeply about them, but it makes me think of sort of a dark question, a Slytherin class question, forbidden books question, which would be, if Wedge is still dreaming at this age, is there some comment on the speed at which you have to progress your dream to reality if you want to be successful in the world, that those people that fail to do so will continue to live within their dreams as long as they're alive and will never escape that initial perspective like the hero will? And that the reason you want to individuate and differentiate yourself is because you actually do have a limited amount of time, and nature is going to eat you at some point, and it's going to eat you faster if you don't do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can contrast his fall from the top of the support girder,
yes,
being looked over by Aeris, but it's already too late for him, really. And the fall that Cloud has a bit earlier to meet Aeris.
True.
Very, very close parallel. And clearly Cloud gets the best of the comparison, right? Like,
right.
As you point out, Aeris is not long for this world either. So you gotta get out there and meet her sooner rather than later. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that almost makes me wonder whether the comment is even more symbolically general, in that moments only last for so long, and you can either, and this is something I suppose we talked about in terms of side quests themselves. You can either, and Vince, I think you made this point very well, that the choice seems to be how well you embody the situation. Not, you don't get to dictate what the situation is, but you get to play your part as well as you can. And this game seems to be so much about substitutions, right? Cloud is pretending to be Zack. He's pretending to be a soldier, someone he's not. Barrett is the adopted father of Marlene. Elmira is the adopted mother of Aeris. Everybody seems to be a substitute, somebody consciously choosing to take a role onto themselves, which is making me wonder whether what a hero truly is somebody who consciously chooses to do something and sticks with that choice forever. And I also think that's what marriage is. So congratulations, Wes.
Far out. I like that a lot. It's pretty meta also, right? Like, as the person playing the game, you start doing that unconsciously. It's like, this is a fun thing to do. But more and more as you look at what you're doing, you realize that you're consciously, and maybe like with the intent of understanding, consciously taking on this role and playing this role to the best of your ability.
And we do take ownership more and more for our characters, and that references what I think Vince said earlier, or no, what you said, that you develop character during the course of the game, and you actually have objective measures like your level, right? You objectively get better at things. It's almost like what the development of character is what the conscious decoration of a Christmas tree is. You consciously add certain habits and modes of behavior to yourself in order to be the person the world needs you to be at that moment. Are you hyperventilating, Vince?
No. I'm just trying to. That's my thinking, breathing.
As long as it's your thinking, breathing.
Yeah. I'm on no FAP, so you don't have to worry. So, one thing that we were discussing in sort of our unconscious.
And you have about a minute, Vince, because we have time constraints today. So make it count. Really distill it down with that philosopher's stone.
Okay, so I guess what I want to throw out there is this idea of a essential individual versus a idea of an individual with a role that is determined by the constellations of others around him. And we spoke about this a little bit in our unconscious messenger to this conscious podcast. And I'm interested in that because of my studies of Mahayana Buddhism, especially with Vimalakirti and Nagarjuna, which are two great thinkers that have to deal with this idea of essentialism or like an actual individual and a being, or no being or nothingness? Or are we thinking about those two things incorrectly? So yeah, sorry guys.
Yeah, that's one hell of a question. I don't know if you want to take 2 minutes to tackle that, Wes, if you have 2 minutes, but if not, we have some serious homework, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I think this is one of the most interesting things about revisiting the Japanese RPG games from childhood, is that they place themselves on this knife's edge between that Taoist slash Buddhist slash whatever, like Eastern root mythologies, and then the Western like narrative mode and certain tropes that go with that. So like when you play these games, you you run this very like tight balance between both of those influences. And I don't know enough about the stuff you're describing to really dig into your question much more beyond saying like this is a fascinating gateway, like these games to starting to actually read both the Western and the Eastern traditions of kind of great thought and thinkers, and see how they can be put into communication and can tell a new kind of story together. I think that's a major project that I'm pretty interested in. I'd love to hear more about your travels in China and whatnot as we go along here, and how. I mean, you clearly picked up a little of the language at least.
Tiny baby bit.
Yeah, but far out. Yeah, great question.
You guys are making me think just one quick thing too. It's funny because when Peterson talks about Lucretius, he says with Lucretius, it's not just everything made out of atoms. There are also the things that are made out of the collections of atoms plus the swerve, the dissipated structures, like what a river is, or what a tornado or a hurricane is. It's not just air. It's air moving in a certain very specific way that creates a very specific phenomenon that is anything but fake and very much real. And that potentially that what a human and what a society is, and what the West seems to have realized, is that we're not the water, we're not the river, we're the river and the water. That we're not the air, we're not the tornado, we're the air and the tornado. That we exist at both levels of analysis all at once, within a general story and within a specific individual story as well. And that the narrative is sort of the space in which we exist, which we might call the world or God or heaven in some ways. But that we are the live action player that is making the choices that's effectively altering the world at the same, we are helping to alter the world in the same time that we are acting within it. And so we're provided with the sort of logos, or the ability to think, so that we can see how those adaptations affect those around us and the world itself. I don't know. It's just, you guys are pretty fascinating individuals, so I can't wait to do this stuff more and more and more. It's like opening the treasure boxes that were hidden behind. It's like finding something hidden in the game each time, except for this is real treasure.
So, really quick.
And remember, Wes has to go. All this is a grace right now.
Yeah. I just want to say, next time, Alex, make sure your phone is charged so we can start on time.
Oh yeah, very good. Yeah, I'll make sure not to hold us up.
I understand you're busy, but you really let us down. But yeah, I feel like 45 minutes is not enough time to spend talking to you guys. I always sort of look forward to this. It's kind of the highlight of my day, and oftentimes my week, depending on if I, see a shitty movie that week.
Thanks.
No, I really mean it. But yeah, so talk to you guys next week.
I could, maybe I could even go sooner, depending on how much you really need it, Vince. If it's between this and opioids, it's a public health concern to keep you occupied. So, physician, heal thyself.
All right. Yeah. Sooner than later. We should talk. Sounds like.
Yeah. And I look forward to these too, Vince. I think one of the motivating reasons for this, besides my juvenile desire for greatness, was my very real desire for community. And so, I think we're building what we're sharing in as we go through this. And I really can't imagine a more Christian message than that. Though I'm not making any specific Christian claim, except for that I think that we nailed it in that and we understand that idea. Where 2 or 3 are gathered in the name of something, we are pursuing Aeris and the fairy princess.
Yeah,
all at once, it seems.
Earth, fire, wind, water, and heart, right? Captain Planet?
Yeah. Very good. Well, dissemble Avengers / Planeteers. Back to your video games, Vince.
Right. See you guys.
See you guys.
The podcast you just heard was published with Anchor. Got something you want to say to the creator of this show? Send them a voice message using the Anchor app, free for iOS and Android.